Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Monica Kanakanti. I work as a machine learning engineer at the multimodal language department. So today, so in the previous sessions, you have seen about how to get the post key points, how to get certain the pre-processing, and then the kinematic features. But in this session, we'll talk about how we can use these raw key points or the kinematic features that we can get from the pipeline to answer real research questions, like the research questions that we have. So I will present two case studies in which we use these heat maps to answer the different research questions we had, right? And also, just as a note that I will not go a lot into the details of how the research was conducted, the experiment setup and all, but it is more to just give a better picture of how you can use these scripts to answer the research questions. So yeah, going to the first research question. What happens to gesture production when visual experience is unavailable, as in the case of the blind individuals, right? So if we say that the spatial cognition of blind speakers influences how they gesture, which means that their gestures track the motion trajectories more precisely, right? So this would lead to larger gestures in the blind group when compared to the sighted and blindfolded. So we wanted to basically test if among the different groups of participants, if there were gesture patterns, if the gestures are larger in certain group and compared to the other groups. So this is the experimental setup, which was an auditory description task. So the participants would sit in the middle of the room, and there were speakers placed at 5 different angles. That is 0 degrees, 45, 90, 135, and 180. So yeah, and there were different auditory events. Like for example, let's say that there was a audio being played on the speaker at 135, and then there was a audio, as in the person's walking from here to here, right? So you could, and then once you play this audio, the participants were supposed to describe this audio. So what they hear, they need to describe using their gestures and through speech. So there were three different groups of participants: blind, blindfolded, and sighted. So this is a sample video where the participant is trying to describe the auditory event, that is someone is walking from a door. So we wanted to see how the gestures differed in these different groups. On the leftmost, you see the gestures, the positions of the hands of the blind group. The middle one is blindfolded, on the rightmost, sighted. So we observe that in the blind group, the gestures are more extended in space when compared to blindfolded and sighted. For example, in sighted group, you can see that the gestures are mostly concentrated in the middle, and they're not really tracking the motion trajectory, right? So these kind of visuals can give us a good glance of what is happening inside the data, and if we can move further with further research questions, or we want to do further analysis and things like that. So this is the first research question. Also, if you want to know more about the details, there is also a poster that we are presenting on this and the ISGS tomorrow, so you can come visit that. And the next research question, since it's from Charisse and she's already here, so she will present it.
Okay, so I'm Charisse Clough. I'm a postdoctoral researcher here at the NPI. And so I'm interested in how speakers design their communication for audiences, but particularly in group settings. So there's a lot of research showing that speakers adapt their gesture features, their frequency, their height, their size when in dyadic communication, but group settings are really challenging because each listener in the group comes with a different level of knowledge. For example, in this big room today, it can be difficult to design your communication appropriately. And so I'm interested in looking at how speakers adapt their gesture size and height in these situations. And I'm also interested in populations with brain injury, and so I look at whether adults with moderate severe traumatic brain injury show different patterns of communication in these types of settings. So, and I also have a poster on Friday, so in here I look not only at gesture but also speech and eye gaze, so please stop by if you're interested. So what do you need to know about the experiment? There were 2 phases, and so in the sorting phase, the participant was a director, and they did a collaborative referential language game with 2 matchers, where they sorted 16 images 4 times. So as is the case in these types of collaborative language games, over the course of the game, they acquired shared knowledge for the images and their labels. So the test phase is where our critical manipulation occurred. So the matchers left the room, and after a short break, we brought back 2 new matchers. And these were either the same 2 matchers who participated in the sorting phase, which is the knowledgeable condition, or 1 knowledgeable and 1 naive matcher who the participant had never met before, or 2 naive matchers. And so in the test phase, we look at how the participant describes images to groups of 2 listeners who differ in their level of knowledge. And so statistically, we looked at changes in gesture size and height. The heat maps provide a really nice visual analysis, so this is what I'll show you today. So you can see that for the non-injured comparison group here, they produce more gestures when talking to groups with 1 or more naive listener, as well as use a larger gesture space and produce gestures that are higher. This heat map shows the same visual display for the traumatic brain injury group. And here the main difference is that people with traumatic brain injury gestured a lot, even for the knowledgeable group. And so they showed less adaptation in their gesture because they had a higher baseline frequency for their gestures in the knowledgeable group. So that's just a couple examples from our team about how you can apply kinematic analyses to your research questions.
Awkward silence. Okay.
So this is Yassine. Hello,
Yes, I will introduce myself in a second. Yeah, so my name is Yassine. I'm a PhD. Whoa, this is not my name. I'm cursed. What did I do? I think it's back. Okay. All right. Let's not mention my name again. Well, I'm not using an adapter though.
Maybe you should. Maybe use the adapter.
Maybe you're bad luck.
I have bad luck. This is not good.
Yeah, use the adapter already.
Okay. It's coming, I think. Yeah, it's coming. Okay. Yes, and I am a PhD student at FAU in Erlangen, Peter supervisor. And today I would like to showcase some of the highlights of my own research using the MULTIDATA platform, and I'll show you some really cool things. Okay, so let's say we're interested in studying how speakers of language X use a particular gesture. What we would need is to collect various instances of use of that gesture, and we can do this in different ways. So we could do something like we've seen earlier, record participants in lab settings and elicit some kind of tasks that would make these speakers potentially use that gesture. Or if we cannot do this and we already have a database available, like a multimodal one, we can go about it this way. But this would be challenging if the data set is large, so we cannot go through all the videos manually. And we also do not really know when, where, or if the gesture was even used in this data set if it's such a huge one. So this is precisely what I'll talk about today, and I'll show you how I was able to get instances of use of a particular gesture using a really huge database. So the case study that I'll talk about today is one that I've been working on for my PhD thesis, and it's the one that Peter mentioned earlier. So I noticed that with this verbal form, this close to something that ends with an ing form, as in I am this close to finishing this talk, I see that people usually would do something like this. They would use this gesture a lot. And I even started calling this the this close to gesture. But is this really the case? So one research question would be, is this gesture strongly associated with this close to only or with something else? So if not, then what other verbal elements is it associated with? And can these verbal elements, if we find them out, tell us something about the meanings and uses of the gesture? So to answer these questions, we need a data set with many instances of use of the gesture, which we can then use to perform different kinds of statistical analyses. So our task is to retrieve the instances of use of this gesture from a large-scale database. And the one that I chose for my purposes is this one, the Newscape 2016 corpus. Show of hands, how many of you are familiar with this database? Obviously not Mark and Peter. Okay, so this is basically a collection of video data taken from American TV shows. So you have a variety of types of programs there, like talk shows programs, news programs, entertainment news shows, and things like that. As you can see, it's pretty big, so it's about 36,000 videos in size, and this is just the 2016 version, which is annotated for gesture. And what is cool about this collection of videos is that it is time-aligned. So you have subtitles, and this allows you to look up a particular expression and get instances of use of that expression in video as well. So you can really see what people do when they say something. But this is not what we're really interested in. We want to go about it from the other way. So we want to retrieve a gesture and see what people do with that gesture and not what they do with a particular verbal form. So this is what I'd like to show you today and how we were able to do that. Now, if you remember earlier, Peter showed this graph here. So basically, a video looks like this, and after we process it through DF Maker, which is something that you can find in MULTIDATA, then everything is on scale. And then we can use this kind of coordinate information to define the gesture in terms of relationships between coordinate points. And I'll show you how we can do that. So let's take this particular frame here where the person is doing this. And let's try to define this gesture in terms of relationships between these different coordinate points that we get. So one really salient feature of this gesture is that the tip of the index finger is always above the tip of the thumb. So no one would do something like this. It's always like this, and they're never actually parallel. They can be touching, but in terms of coordinates, this one is always above this one. So if we want to translate this into a numerical relationship, we could say that the coordinate number of this point here, which is 0.8, must be bigger because it falls in the y-axis than that of the thumb. So this would mean that the y-coordinates of this point must be bigger than that of the second point. So obviously this is not enough. If you only specify that this is bigger than this, you can get something like this or like this, etc. So we need to define a gesture in a more concrete way. So we could add more conditions, something like the tip of the index finger. So this one must always be above the tip of the middle finger, the ring finger, and the pinky finger. And you can keep going and going until you really get a restrictive definition of the gesture. So you keep collecting these kind of conditions, numerical ones, if you will. You can also play around with the x-axis. So you'd notice something that when someone uses their right hand to use this gesture, the thumb is always slightly to the right of the index finger. No one does this. So it could either be like this or maybe somehow parallel. So this again would translate to something like the x coordinate points of coordinate number, of this point must be slower than this. And for the left hand, you just inverse these but keep the white ones as such. So basically what we do here, we collect all these conditions into our script. Now remember, each frame of each video in the corpus file is processed through OpenPost. So we have all this information for each frame in the database. So what the R script does is that it looks through each of these frames, right, frame by frame, and tries to find if these conditions are met within that frame. If they are met, it picks it up, and then we can do some stuff with it. So it then creates a link for a video snippet that starts 2 seconds to the left and 2 seconds to the right, so you can actually see what the person does. Because just if in only one frame you have someone that does this, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're using the gesture. I could be scratching my head, but in one frame, I look like this. So the hand technically is correct, but I'm not really using the gesture in a linguistic way. So once all of this is done, we get a list of video snippet links in which the gesture was potentially used, and then we collect its corresponding concordances. So remember, for each video, we have subtitles, so we can use that information to see what kind of verbal elements co-occur with the gesture. And then, obviously, the last step is to manually go through the data set and annotate it. Now, I know that I've said that this is a really huge database, so it's about 36,000 videos. So it takes a lot of computing power, and this is what Armina will tell you about now, so that you can understand how we scale this up to such a huge database. Go ahead.
Thank you. So yes, you introduced me. Thank you for that too. I'm Armina, and I'm a liaison scientist at the FIU in Germany. So the question I have for you is, how much time does it take to automatically search for a gesture in 1 hour of video data? Now, for an average laptop, it would take around 2 minutes. And if you were to search for a relatively high-frequent construction gesture like nodding, then you might go just for a couple of hours of video data and get your sufficient instances of that gesture. However, as in the case of Yassine, that is looking at Yassine is this close to finishing his PhD gesture. You could say that, well, a couple of hours are not enough, right? So probably you need a lot of data to build a sufficient corpus of these gestures. So what can we do? Well, we could, well, first of all, take a corpus that is as large as that, the corpus that Yassine mentioned earlier. Now, importantly, it has around 36,000 hours of data. So if you think that you need around 2 minutes for 1 hour, that means that it would take us around 72,000 hours to go through the whole corpus. So let's make it dramatic. It would take us 8 years to wait for results. Now, do we have all this time? Maybe, but maybe not. We need a paper to be published, so we need the results quicker. What can we do? One thing we can do is make use of the HPC resources. HPC stands for High Performance Computing, and is basically a system of very powerful machines that can process your data, the vast amounts of data at a high speed, anyway faster than an average laptop. So again, for comparison, what used to take 2 minutes for an average laptop would take only 1 minute. This is our multidata coordinator from Murcia, Cristobal, using the HPC resources. Now, you could say this is not a dramatic difference, right? 2 minutes, 1 minute, okay, it's twice, but exactly, it's 4 years still using the HPC resources. But the great advantage of the HPC is that it has many more resources, right? So we can run our searches in parallel by administering several computers to do the same thing at the same time. Now, what do I mean by that? So the traditional or the consecutive way would be to say, well, let me first go through all the January videos, through all the February and March videos, but then if I have 12 computers available, let's put it that way, I could run these 12 searches in parallel, which would speed up my computation by 12 times. And again, if I have even more computers available, I could imagine a scenario where I would run the first 10 days of the month parallel to the middle 10 days of the month or the last 10 days of the month, which would give me an advantage of speed by 36 times. And you know, there are further scenarios where you could run the search through the first 12 hours of the day parallel to the second half of the day, and that gives you an advantage of 72 times faster than the consecutive approach. Now, what used to take us 8 years with the consecutive approach could have been actually done in less than a month with the scenario you see on this slide. So now that we have this approach, how do we actually do it? Well, what is the format of the data that we have stored? Well, for each video, we have, of course, the video file itself, the MP4 file, but we also have the OpenPose key points coordinates that many of the previous speakers have mentioned, and it's the OpenPose text files that we are going to search through. Now, as it turns out, it's not very efficient to look through a large number of files, and OpenPose are stored, right, in thousands of TXT files. So that's why we're going as a step one, convert all the archives that we already have into a particular type, the paquet type, which seems to store the data more efficiently, and is also the data type that the DF maker is using. Then as a second step, so the steps are actually not different from whatever Yassine explained for one small video excerpt. So we would normalize the key points using the DF maker tool that is offered by the multidata pipeline. And then we'll look for matching conditions, and if a match is found, we will create a link to this video snippet. So in the end, we expect to find a huge, hopefully, list of matches, so links that point towards certain parts in the video with the starting and the ending timestamps to a certain snippet where we expect to find the gesture in question. Back to you.
Okay. Now, we're talking about this to show you some kind of results. So that's precisely what I'll do in 2 minutes, because first of all, I need to tell you a few things about the limitations of this method. So first of all, it's not fully automatic. If you just do this, you're not automatically going to get all the right hits. So like I said earlier, you need some kind of manual annotation. And I'll explain to you why. So for this particular gesture, it seems like this is not a really encouraging kind of result, so it's only 10%. But 10% is actually really good if you consider the larger context, which I'll show you in a minute. So the method retrieved many true positives that were just not of interest to us. And to show you a few examples, in all of these frames, what you see is actually what you really wanted to get. So all of them are doing this with their hands, but in the first example here, this one, the person is holding a needle, so it's just unfortunate that he's holding it like that. Here, he's holding a coin. So again, it's the code, the method is not wrong, but it's not what we're interested in. Here, he's going to adjust the mic. So again, the hand is shaped in the right way, but it's not what we're really interested in. And same thing here. So he's scratching or holding his chin. The hand is correctly shaped, but it's not what you want. And you also get a lot of stuff where people are holding the mic. So for an object detection tool, you can easily get rid of these. But for something like this and this, you just have to accept that you'll find them unless you define a gesture, or you're dealing with a different kind of gesture. But with this one, this hand shape is really found in different everyday stuff, so you just really cannot get rid of it. And that's why the precision rate was that low. But still, a lot of manual annotation is necessary, like I said. However, it still remains a really powerful tool that we can use to do all sorts of linguistic analysis. And that's what I would like to show you here. Because remember, earlier I said that I thought that this was the this close to gesture. Is it really the case? Well, apparently not really. So the gesture co-occurs with many verbal forms in a statistically significant way. So using the collected instances that we got using this method and their corresponding concordances, we were able to perform some statistical analyses like cross-modal color structural analysis. Now, you don't need to know how this thing really works in detail, but all you have to know is that this is a method that allows you to rank words that occur within a particular construction or with a gesture or something, and you can see which one is most strongly associated with that construction, and you can just rank them, and it gives you a lot of information about how the construction or the gesture is used. So for this one, as you can see here, we get all sorts of cool information, like how often the gesture is used with the particular word, how many times the word is used without the gesture in other contexts, and this is the association measure that I'm using to rank these words based on strength of association. And one thing you might be wondering is, Pringle? What's that? How is that related to this gesture? It kind of makes no sense. Maybe, yeah, but Pringle as in the chip that you eat. It's weird, and it seems like it only occurs with a gesture and nowhere else. So if you look at the actual example, you'll see why this was the case. So I'll play this twice, and you'll see that the gesture actually never occurred with Pringle. It occurred with something else. But within the snippets, Pringle was mentioned 3 times. So it just got associated with the gesture. Have a look at this.
Anyways, to Buttermuffin says, I would like to see a chip press that gathers all the crumbs from the bottom of the chip bag and forms it into one final chip.
Yeah, a Pringle.
That's one final.
Yeah.
Oh, a Pringle. Yeah,
let's get a Pringle out of it.
It's already been.
So, sorry, actually he said one final, but he never said Pringle like this. It was just mentioned in the video snippet. But since it forms parts of the whole concordance line, and well, from a numerical perspective, it seems like it is strongly associated with the gesture. But this is why I keep saying that some manual annotation and human intervention here is necessary. So if we kind of do that for the data set, you see that many of them actually make sense. Like slim, for example, it seems to be the most strongly associated word with the gesture, followed by tiny, inch, slightly, quarter, small, closely, close again, bit, and little. And this was really fascinating because for the longest time we thought that this close to is really the most associated pattern with the gesture, but it turns out not really. And all of these verbal forms can tell us something about the meaning of the gesture. So some of these words kind of form clusters or patterns, and not patterns, but groups, like slim, small, tiny. All of these have something to do with size. Something with close has to do with proximity, so temporal proximity or something like that. And we were basically able to get this information about how the gesture is used thanks to a method like this. Let's get rid of the laser here. Okay, we can do the same thing for multi-word units, like trigrams. And you'll notice something similar here. So it seems like one of the most strongly associated trigrams with the gesture is "and they control." So again, how does that make any sense? You have to watch the video.
Obvious, and they control Crooked Hillary, and they
So funnily enough, Hillary was one of the most strongly associated words with a gesture. And guess why? Because Trump does this thing when, he speaks all the time. And this was 2016 data, so a lot of campaign data, and, well, you know how that went away. But the cool thing is that if we disregard these things, you can see that the trigram this close to, or half an inch, or little bit of, or a little bit, are some of the most strongly associated patterns with this close to. And it seems like people, when they say these kind of expressions, they tend to use this gesture quite a lot. So, to summarize all of this, with this method, we were able to identify the range of expressions with which the gesture occurs, perform statistical analysis to determine which ones are most strongly associated with it, and also rank them by strength of association, get a broader perspective on how the gesture is used, and finally identify the range of meanings of the gesture, and we could also describe them. So if you want to learn more about this, because I applied it to another kind of gesture, yes, you can come to my poster on Thursday, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. And thank you.